Thank you to everyone joining us today from across the country and the world. I'm Alexander McCobin here at Conscious Capitalism, Inc., and I so appreciate you taking the time to learn and grow in community with us today. Today, we're joined by Gerry Fernandez and Fred LeFranc to explore cultural competency, a conscious leadership non-negotiable. As many of you know, conscious capitalism is a philosophy that emphasizes the human nature of capitalism and business. It's a movement of business leaders around the world working to improve the practice and perception of capitalism to elevate humanity. And Conscious Capitalism, Inc. is a nonprofit organization dedicated to catalyzing that movement. Every week, we offer these virtual gatherings as a way for the community to see how this philosophy takes shape in the leadership journeys and the business practices of those in our network. Now, today's gathering will run for 45 minutes. Gerry and Fred will be in conversation for about the first 30 minutes, and then we're going to transition to questions from you in the audience for the last 10 to 15 minutes. So if at any point you have a question for Gerry or Fred, please type your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any technical questions or issues, please email us at info@consciouscapitalism.org. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. As president and founder of the MFHA, the Multicultural Food Service and Hospitality Alliance, an educational nonprofit organization that makes the business case for developing cultural intelligence in the workplace, Gerry Fernandez has spent decades educating and advocating for the business benefits of cultural diversity and inclusion in the food service and hospitality industry. An engagingly energetic speaker who practices straight talk, he travels across the US and internationally, bringing an authentic perspective on building cultural intelligence that raises the top line, improves the bottom line, and builds brands' cultural authenticity. Gerry was named to the nation's Restaurant News 2018 Power List of the 50 most influential people in food service, quote, the definitive list of industry leaders who are not only setting trends today, but are shaping them for tomorrow. And in a fast-paced industry with new technology, competition, and laws changing the game every day, Fred LeFranc brings order to disorder and helps businesses thrive in the restaurant industry. He's a well-respected veteran who has advised many of the industry's most significant executives and companies, from startups to billion-dollar global chains, to deliver long-term sustainable success. He's a change agent assisting brands on reinventing and evolving to stay relevant to their current and potential customers. He combines direct knowledge of operating a restaurant with an inherent talent for business and acute vision for growth. Fred leverages his passion for business, understanding of human behavior, and knowledge of technology to provide corporate counsel and make a lasting impact. As a corporate strategist, he has turned around many declining businesses, helping significantly improve sales. And I can't imagine two people better to talk about cultural competency and why that's a conscious leadership non-negotiable today. Gerry and Fred, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom with the community today.
Thanks, great to be here.
Alexander, thanks for the great introduction, taking some time out of your dinner hour in Dubai. So, Gerry, good to see you, my friend. I've known Gerry since both of us had hair.
Yeah.
And
Hey.
that just ages us, but it's great to spend some time with you. And this is an interesting topic. I've been part of the conscious capital movement for almost a decade, and of course, one of the tenets is conscious leadership. And when it comes to this conversation around cultural competency or cultural intelligence, it's fascinating to me to see that so many leaders don't really understand what that is. So I want to start at a very fundamental level and sort of build on from there so we get it. So Gerry, let me just ask you a very, very broad question. What makes up a culture in a company, in your opinion?
Well, culture is all of the stuff that keeps us together. It informs all of our guardrails and shapes our values. And so, when we CEOs are the keepers of the culture of any organization, and we hear all the time, culture beats strategy every time. But we, for too long, did not spend enough time looking at who actually making and shaping the culture, and is it inclusive? Are we including all of the people who make up the organization? And as we continue to see the population shifts moving in a direction where there'll be more people of color, more Latinos. We see the growth rate in the U.S. shrunk by 4%. Saw that in the news just recently. The biggest drop in history. There are big implications for that. So if I want to be part of the company, I want to see a culture, a standard of norms. I want to see policies and procedures that make me feel like I belong here. If the culture is only good for the ones who play golf on Saturday, but it's not good for those of us who like hockey, the culture is only good for people who went to great schools and not for people who went to, tier 2 institutions, then we've got problems. And the way culture and social issues are moving at such a fast pace, senior leaders have really got to get their head around building that competency, that cultural muscle to understand, what we need to get good at, and how we need to be better at communicating what I can say, what I can't say, where I need to be leading this organization if we want to get to inclusion.
Okay, so let's just level set some semantics. So let's use the word company culture for that which is internal to an organization that a leader is part of. And then let's talk about societal culture as the external things, the world that we live within. Because what we've seen in this past year, obviously the pandemic, goes without saying, was the biggest impact. But we also had, the Black Lives Matter movement take hold as a result of the killing of George Floyd. We've seen Asian hate crimes on the rise. That's also occurred. A lot of issues on immigration, all this milieu that we're sort of within. But as we let's go within what we can control. There's that great expression that says, Stephen Covey talked about the circle of concern and circle of influence. And when we start with our circle of concern, which where an intentional leader can play, that could grow into a broader arena, right? We know that overall. And we're not here to solve the issue. We're not here to take a position. This is not a political discussion. It's more of providing the people who are watching this webinar a way of thinking about it. Because the one thing I do know, if you don't have an answer for a question you may be asked publicly, you may put your foot in your mouth, unwittingly, and we don't want to have that. So let's just start out with that internal culture. So my definition of a company's culture, to me, my metaphor is a swimming pool. And everyone's responsible to keep the water clean in a swimming pool, because the culture is where we all walk through and live through and so forth and so on. That's why I say there is no peeing section in a swimming pool, because it affects one, it affects all. And that's part of what we have to do. So I'm going to use a model of emotional intelligence. And Gerry, you and I were talking earlier about sort of the formula for success, which, to quote you, was IQ, which is, the intelligence quotient, plus EQ, which is emotional quotient, plus CQ, which is the cultural quotient or cultural intelligence, to develop some form of success. And success, not just from a standpoint of financial success, but success for your people, i.e. the cultural success that you want to derive. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think, you said it right. And we, this is not something that I'm the intellectual wizard. I read and learn. And what we've seen is the companies who put the best leaders, who understand their emotional aspects of how they interact with their employees, and then understand culturally how that plays out. I mean, I can be really good with managing my emotions, but I just don't understand Black people. I didn't grow up with Black folks, so I have blind spots. We were just talking with Danny Meyer's group, Union Square Hospitality, and one of the young African-American employees talked about how she works for the company. She comes to the hostess stand when she's off with her friend, and the young lady there goes right to the white woman and overlooks her. And she said, I work here and I feel really good about being here, but I feel like I was here first. She was giving insights to the experience that she has as a woman of color. Right. And what leaders have to do is have the insights to understand what experiences people of difference are having within your organization as employees, as guests, as vendors. I went on to tell a story that going to the tile store, to buy tile for my bathroom when the whole thing kind of blew up. I went in and I was the only Black person there, and I wasn't dressed in a suit or tie. And I could tell by the cold energy I was getting that there was like, okay, what do you want? But I intentionally used some terms and said some things that immediately goes, oh, well, this guy, he belongs. Changed the whole demeanor, changed the whole entire experience for me. And that is me using my cultural intelligence to say, look, I don't have time for aggravation today. I want to get my tie, I want to get served. If I got to make this guy think that I belong because I told him I opened Hemingway Seafood Grill and, oh, you must be smart. That's what I'll do. But leaders, company leaders have to begin to understand where the blind spots are, understand what about different cultural groups that use your brand or that are part of the brand, what is their experience? And then how do I build authentic, culturally authentic behaviors? Why do I build advertising that is culturally authentic? How do I have community outreach? All those things connect.
So let's start off with the first basics of emotional intelligence, is self-awareness, right? That's the first one. So you already sort of touched a little bit on it. And I know in my own experience and having worked with you and known you for so many years, the part of self-awareness, and this is where leaders start with themselves, is what are my unconscious biases?
Mhm.
And this is the, to me, is really the revelatory. I mean, when you look in the mirror and someone helps you see something that you'd rather not look at, reflecting back at you, where you become aware of your unconscious biases, that could be a very disheartening moment, because all of a sudden you can say, well, I'm not a prejudiced person. It's not a prejudiced bone in my body. And then you find out that that's not necessarily true, that there are some unconscious things that pop up that, can bite you, and that's an issue. So let's talk about unconscious bias, Gerry. And brief, because we got a lot to go through. So keep it.
Well, self-awareness is one of the cultural competencies that we have on our 5-point model. But unconscious bias, all this stuff comes from the way we were raised, the things that we were taught to believe, our experiences, our thoughts, our attitudes. And I'll give you a very clear story. I did not know that I had homophobic tendencies. I found it out when I was at a board meeting of our group in New York City at the Marriott Essex House. And we're in a big boardroom. I got about 25 people there, and I'm standing in a suit at the podium, and I'm telling people about blind spots. Interestingly enough, we were talking about blind spots. And I told the story, we were living in Minnesota. I said, my son came home with Derek, my middle boy, dark skin, chocolate brown like my wife. He brings home his girlfriend, blonde hair, blue-eyed girl. So I say to the group, so I talked to my son after she leaves. I said, how come you don't have a girlfriend that looks like mom? Everybody in the room goes, oh, you didn't just say that. I'm diversity, man. I can't say that. And I say, come on, you never heard somebody say, bring home a good Italian boy, bring home a good Irish girl, bring home a good Jewish girl. And Lou Cossack, who was the chief people officer at Applebee's, in the back of the room, yells out, what if you brought home a blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy? And the room, you could hear a pin drop. And I'm there on the podium going, oh, shit. Because I didn't have an answer for him. I said, Lou, I'd have to accept it, but I have some work to do. And I knew right there that I had not addressed my blind spot about LGBTQ, which I had gotten from my two uncles, big military guys, anybody who's all the things that we said about the gay community. And I went home and asked my admin, I said, one of my staff, I said, do I have homophobic tendencies? She said, yes, you do. And she listed us. Oh, shit. So I went about purposefully trying to understand where it came from, unbundling it, and being able to say today that I'm a big advocate for the LGBT community. Now I had to struggle because I'm trying to be a born again Christian, which I'm not doing a great job of. And there are some things that the Bible says about LGBTQ. So how do you hold them? These are issues that are very hard for people, but we have to confront them. I'm 100% better person because I did address it and I can talk about it freely. So that's an example of bias, unconscious bias. Didn't know I had it, but it slapped me right upside the head and it shows up in work.
Yeah, not everyone's going to have that epiphany at a moment in time. If someone wants to take an inventory of potential unconscious biases, is there a process one could use?
Yeah, there's a ton of things that you can do. And I don't try to push one or another, but during your lunch hour, type in on YouTube, unconscious bias. You're going to see a ton of things. P&G did a great series of unconscious bias videos. They're very short. They're 2 to 3 minutes. They're easy to watch, but you get a sense of, wow, that's me. That's me thinking about that. But once you understand that if you have a brain, you have bias. We all have bias. There are 11 million bits of information coming at you at any one time. The problem is the brain can only process, 40 or so at one moment, and then only 5 to 7 consciously. The rest are done subconsciously. It's like driving in a snowstorm. You're trying to keep your eyes on the road. All the snow's going by you. You're not watching anything else. And your brain is doing that all the time, always trying to chunk things down. So you see somebody right away, you put him in a box. Ooh, he looks like a motorcycle guy. Or this person looks like that. And it's when you begin to understand where bias shows up, you catch yourself and you go, I have to rethink that.
And that, by the way, leads into the second one, which is sort of that self-control, right? Self-management. So the impulse doesn't necessarily ever go away. It's just that your awareness of it rising up, you become, and people always, it's always funny because I tell people when I speak to them publicly, if you ever hear someone say they're self-aware, big clue, they're not. Because anyone who attempts to be self-aware realizes with incredible humility how difficult that is. And so self-awareness to me is sort of the moment-by-moment observation of one's own behavior. Okay, that's what I call self-awareness, and that is not easy to do. And it's not so much something you do from a focus standpoint as much as something you sort of do more from a state of being. And as you get into self-control, that impulse comes up. And as Gerry said, that you go, oh, I got to catch that because before it gets out and something comes out that I don't want to say, you become aware of it. And this is where leaders and organizations need to be really mindful of it. And let's face it, it's a real minefield out there right now. Because it's not about being politically correct. I don't think we're talking about that. It's not about cancel culture or things like that. It's just the awareness that every human being is someone's precious son and daughter and should be treated with love and respect and kindness. And especially if they're an employee contributing to your company, why wouldn't you want the best of that person to come forward rather than a repressed part of them to show up?
Well, once you become self-aware to a degree, you recognize I have blind spots. So when you're making a decision, Dr. Samuel Batanzas, Harvard PhD, one of the fathers of diversity, my mentor, said the next time you're making a decision, you look around the room and everybody looks like you're doing it wrong. And so that's the issue. What perspective is missing in the room? If you don't understand what's going on in the Black community as a result of George Floyd, and you don't have anybody at high level, then you have a blind spot. You have a blind spot. I mean, this is self-awareness leads you to cross-cultural understanding. I got to understand that I didn't grow up with Koreans or Japanese. I didn't grow up in a military background. All those are different cultures. I've got to learn enough about those different cultural groups to learn to build connections and to be able to not to step into potholes. Okay, I got to understand the terms and the phrases and the issues that matter for the LGBTQ community. The LGBTQ plus. For a lot of people, that plus makes a whole lot of difference. It may not make a whole lot of difference to you, but if you say, well, I don't care what lifestyle they live, boom. As soon as you say lifestyle, off the reservation, okay? People immediately put you in the box that he doesn't get it. And I ask women all the time, I say, listen, if you work in a company and there's somebody who comes up, he's new, he starts the whole thing, hey, how you doing? He's looking around. He gets the icky mark, right? Once he's put in the box as a sexist, icky person, does he ever get out of the box? And the answer is no, he never does. That's how you have to think about the brand. Once your brand gets associated with something, it's really hard to undo it. And we've got plenty of examples of brands who are still doing great work, but are suffering because of something that was done ages ago. And now all the issues of race, politics in work, health and safety concerns, income inequality, the lost year in education because kids of color and low-income folks didn't have the ability to use computers, so they've lost a whole year in education. What's that going to mean for our workforce? And the whole issue of belonging. If I don't think you care about the issues that impact me, if you say it's fake news and the pandemic was made up, I personally lost 4 family members to COVID-19. It ain't fake news to me. And when we talk to leaders, and you can't have somebody, we had a chief operating officer who had a somewhat senior level meeting, came out and said, those idiots who voted for Biden, they should be taken out and flogged or something to that nature. Well, guess what? Other people heard that. And now you got to rip. They're like, oh, senior leadership, they're on the right side. They don't care about you. You can't say those things like you used to be able to.
let me ask you this: as we go into that next level of emotional intelligence, is social awareness. That's really what you're sort of talking about now. How do we get into the external world? And in an era of obviously polarized politics, we know that, and a lot of divisiveness, and everyone's got their own echo chamber. Whichever side you're on, whether you're left, right, or in the middle, there's an echo chamber that's going to tell you what you want to hear. And here's the challenge for a CEO. So a CEO has a lot of responsibilities, and invariably they're the public face of the brand, and they're going to be asked things, okay, along the way. And so when we were talking about this webinar, a big point you made, which I actually agree with, is that regardless of your personal feelings, you have to be able to respond to someone's asking you about that, so that you have a position of some sort. Now, it's not about being neutral. You may choose to take a position that is either one side or the other. But be aware that there's ramifications to that. Yeah. But how does a CEO develop not just the social awareness about what's happening out there, but to develop a response that if someone says, "What's your view of Black Lives Matter, Asian hate crimes, the pandemic," whatever the case may be? What's the process one would use to figure it out? Because the topics will always change.
Well, one of the model I like to use is Marriott. Arne Sorensen, God rest his soul, passed away recently. He was their CEO. And Arne, you could drop him anywhere in the world on any issue, and he could speak extemporaneously about anything because he understood the value of inclusive perspectives. That's how that brand got so good. They knew they had customers coming from all over the place. But he had a response team. He had people involved that if something came up, they immediately convened. I think it's a small group, 4 or 5 or 6 of them, and said, look, here's the situation. What do you think we should do about it? They put it through their screen, the decision-making screen, okay? So I was just talking to somebody else. Is it good for our customers? Is it gonna support our employees? If the answer is no, you don't do it. Well, they had a simple screen. Then they said, okay, well, this is our decision. We know it's gonna not be popular with this group and that group. So John, you get on the phone, you go talk to them because we know they're not gonna like it. Explain to them, we took this position. We know it's inconsistent with what you like, but we feel it's important to support this issue. So and we saw this with the bathroom bill a few years ago, right there in your home state of North Carolina, where companies came out in support of the LGBTQ transgender bathroom issue. Now the voting issue that's going on in Georgia and other places, this one's like the third rail for a lot of folks, and they don't want to touch it. But I can tell you, by these full-page ads that were in the New York Times, the 72 African-American executives, made public their thought that corporate America should stand against anything that looks like voter suppression. And I know some of the people on that list, and I'm telling you, they're not backing down. So you're going to have to figure out up front, where do we want to be on this? What's going to be our decision? And then what's going to be the fallout? Because in restaurants, we were talking earlier, if somebody doesn't behave themselves well, it used to be the customer was always right. Well, I don't care if you're a $150,000 customer. There are things you can't do. You can't disrupt. I have to fire the customer. So there's going to be some situations where you're going to take heat. You plan for it. You decide it's consistent with your values. You've done it through a cultural screen. You've talked to your cultural constituents. If you've got people on your board, you've got relationships that reach into different cultural aspects of the community, Black, white, LGBTQ, disability, military, anyone else that you need. And you've got a clear understanding of how they see the view, how they see the perspective, then you can make good decisions. But you have to do it ahead of time because it's going to happen in real time. The microphone's going to get put in somebody's face. They're going to say, did you hear about this? What's your position?
Yeah, so I'm spending a lot of time in Atlanta where, there's been a lot of activity in Atlanta from the last election to even what's coming out now. And, you see a situation where, Coke and Delta, 2 of the largest employers in the city, sort of came out with a half-step statement when the voting rights passed, and that had backlash. And of course, they sort of went to the other side, and then immediately on Twitter, you see people say, I'll never fly Delta again, and let me order a Pepsi, on and on and on and on, and no one's watching NFL football anymore. It goes, and so it's a damn if you do, damn if you don't situation. That's what is very obvious to me. And I think what you just shared as advice is at least have a small group of people as advisors to say, okay, let's pick all the issues of the day and let's think about what our response is that we would like to do. Because another example is, the founder and CEO of Basecamp said, oh my God, all this political discussion is too polarizing. It's distracting people away from work. So we're going to come up with a no politics conversation zone. And 1/3 of their employees publicly resigned like that. Okay. And not because they agreed or disagreed with the position left or right. It was just because he said, oh, I can't speak my mind in the workplace. I'm out of here. Again, damn if you do, damn if you don't. And these are, I don't think the CEO thought that was going to happen. I'm
obviously not.
It was going to be, a relief. We're not going to have to get all this noise anymore. And instead, everyone said, no, this is not the kind of place we want to work.
Well, and if he had sat down and done listening tours, we have a bunch of companies that we work with who did listening tours. They sat down and said, how are you feeling in this pandemic? How are you experiencing? What should we be doing? How could we support you? What are your thoughts? And so, Yum Brands chose and decided not to allow anything on people's masks. And the reason they chose not to support Black Lives Matter or the Blue Thin Line or whatever, they said, for us, it was a customer employee safety issue. We believe if you have something on the mask other than our brand, there could be a potential where somebody reacts negatively. One of our employees or one of our guests could get hurt. Now that decision metric makes sense in a lot of things. Is it going to put our employees at risk? Then we don't do it. Now I'll give you another good example. If you go way back when we had, was it the Tylenol scare? The Tylenol when we had the tainted. One of the things, and I think one of the big universities did a whole piece on it, a case study. What he did when he drove up to and didn't know what that was going on, and they put the microphone in his face, and he said, "I don't know what's going on right now. I guarantee you, I'm going to find out. I'm going to come back here. I'm going to tell you, and our decision is going to be consistent with our values." And then that's exactly what he did. He went inside, found out that Tylenol had been tainted in these places, blah, blah. He came out there, he says, we found out this is what's going on. We don't know the cause just yet. We have these things we're taking it, and we will move X, Y, Z. And he stayed on message. Now, did that make everybody happy? Did they get all the answers up front? No, but he wasn't going to say things that he didn't know. So in this situation, we're going to have to play some of these scenarios all the way out, and really talk to our employees to understand. It's something we learned about a cultural engagement model that we developed. And it's really, if you don't understand or you don't know about a particular group that you have as employees or guests or customers or whatever, there are things they want you to know. They want you to know who I am, where I come from, how I self-identify. My last name is Fernandez. That's a Hispanic surname. My family's from Cape Verde, West Africa. I have African Portuguese roots. I identify as a Black American. So if somebody keeps calling me Dominican, after a while it starts to tick me off, all right? Because that's not who I am, all right? And so how do I see the world? How am I experiencing it? What's going on how am I experiencing COVID? How's this racism thing impacting me? Two big conversations, one with a university, one with an executive. My white male employees legitimately are feeling like they got a target on their back, that it's all about women, it's all this Black stuff. And now Hispanics are saying, what about me? And, that's all happening. So it's a tough time to be a leader. And so the more you build your cultural competence, your cultural intelligence, you begin to understand how this will play out with this group, how this will play out with that group. Then you can begin to make some decisions around, hey, who's our constituents, who are our stakeholders? We don't care if we tick those people off, okay? Because those people are not our customers, or they're not the ones that are helping this brand, or for whatever reason. There are some constituents we don't have to be worried about, but there are other constituents that we do have to worry about, and we have to be thoughtful about how those things cross cultural lines.
So as we go into the fourth level of emotional intelligence, relationship management, in this case is how does a conscious leader take their internal culture, strengthen it, and then as they interface with the public or their customers, whatever the case may be, they can make impact. And I have two examples in mind in terms of how two companies approach this.
Yeah.
Patagonia is very much about nature conservation, the climate change, and their own practices. They're consciously telling people, don't buy new clothes from us, buy used clothes from us. And they've now set up a whole thing where you can buy, sort of worn Patagonia that's been refurbished, as a way to say, this is my way of not creating more waste and so forth and so on. Not as much of a lightning rod issue, but they've shown how they could take their culture and expand it to be more inclusive and be more thoughtful. Then the other one that comes to mind, because I'm in the South, is NASCAR decided to ban Confederate flags. That created,
A great example.
third rail issue, right? Two very different companies, both trying to quote unquote do something good within society. And then what ends up happening is that this one seems to be, Patagonia doesn't quite create the same uproar, but NASCAR sure did. So what would you say to those situations, Gerry?
So again, these managing the relationships. Clearly, the NASCAR example. First of all, do I think that the Black and Latino community will ever be the predominant group at NASCAR? No. Okay. But even if you got close to the representation, that would be good for the bottom line. They made a values-based decision. This Confederate flag is coming down. It came off the State House in South Carolina. It clearly is offensive to some people. Is this worth all the energy? No. Do you think all those NASCAR people are going to stop coming to NASCAR because you took the flag away? The reality is no. All those people who said they're not going to watch football anymore because, the Black players and some of the white players stood up and said, Black Lives Matter, we're going to take a knee. You think all those people stopped watching football? The numbers suggest that's not the case. We say it. Americans have short memory on some things, but they have long memory on other things. I will tell you, the long memory on dropping the Confederate flag goes way beyond just the Black community. It made a statement, and in my mind, it legitimized NASCAR's leadership as, wow, I haven't taken my grandkids to a NASCAR event, but guess what? I have plans to. Because, I've always been a NASCAR fan to some degree. I watch it on TV. But you know what? That sent a message to me. And just like Patagonia sent a message to their customer base, what we stand for, and we're thinking big picture, I think brands can build cultural authenticity into their brand by the things that they do, by the things that they embrace. Is it okay to be gay in your company? Well, we say so, but what kind of behaviors, what kind of activity does the company take? Do we do that? The voting issue, this is going to be a big issue. And I would encourage people to say, we give people time off to vote. We make sure it's easy access for them to get to vote. But whether you're going to comment on public issues, if you comment on one, they're going to want you to comment on the other. So you may have to decide that, how are we going to frame what we comment on, what we don't? And then who are we going to give money to? Because politically, that's going to get found out. And I don't make the rules. I maybe don't even like them, Fred. But I'm just telling you, from all the undertow, all the comments that I've been talking with CEOs and others and people from community groups, this thing's going to pick up momentum. And companies are going to have to say, I stand with the union or I stand with the Confederacy. That's how some people say it.
So let me recap sort of what we went through. We talked about the 4 stages of emotional intelligence. You can pick up a copy of Daniel Golden's book who talks about it, but I thought because we're talking about cultural intelligence and competency, it was a good model. So we started with self-awareness. So it says the leader should become as socially or culturally aware of what their unconscious biases are, just to know what their predisposition is before they step into the arena of dealing with your company culture. Understanding once you have that self-awareness, then it's sort of self-control. So you begin to understand I have an impulse and I'm going to contain that. And Gerry talked about listening tours. The best way to do that is to begin to understand where someone's coming from by just asking them very personal questions so you have a sense of who they are. When you get into the social awareness, into the public arena, is be aware that all the headlines that are out there, at some point, someone may ask you about it, either internally or externally, and you should have some response built as a result of forming a small committee to help you. And then last one, the relationship management is if you as a company want to take a stand, a position on something for the betterment of your culture, your company, the society at large, the communities you serve, be thoughtful about that, because as you take a position, someone's going to be in opposition. I always know as a CEO, and I've been a CEO for a long time, no matter what decision I make, I'm going to piss off a certain percentage.
Somebody, right. But you make conscious decisions about where we want to be. We want to be on the right side of history.
Right.
And this is what we want. What does the brand stand for? And if inclusion is part of what you want to then you got to look at all the people that you impact and say, am I making decisions that are in the best interest of our constituency, our stakeholders? And are they consistent with our values? If they are, then I think you're good.
I have one question before I turn it back over to Alexander for the group question. If someone makes a mistake inside your culture and they said something inappropriate or behaved in a way that was culturally insensitive, again, unconscious bias was the leading cause, and made that faux pas. To what degree should they be punished or an approach?
So I'm a big believer when you have to practice grace. And when we teach unconscious bias, or we teach cultural intelligence, we just did a de-escalation workshop for Danny's group. We have to offer grace. We're human beings. We're going to make mistakes, okay? And so I'm going to step on your toe unknowingly. I didn't know that was culturally was insensitive in your perspective. So you got to give people the ability to make mistakes and recover. I do not believe the answer is to fire somebody every time. Okay, there are some things that you cross the line. You're dropping the N-word, you're probably going to get fired. Okay, I think that I get that. But somebody says the wrong thing, they didn't mean to say it, or even if they were ignorant, send them to training. He's, Gerry's a good employee. He made a mistake. We're gonna give him some training and coach him up and put him back out there because he's a great contributor to the team. Right. I'd like to see more companies doing that, because we can't just cancel people out and throw them away. I'm not a believer in throwing away relationships. I've been fired twice in my life, once when I was a kid, once I was older. The person who fired me the second time around put me on the board of my alma mater because I recovered from my mistakes. I fixed what was wrong. And I think we have to have that grace, offering grace if you make a mistake is the way to go.
That's fantastic. All right, Alexander, we're going to ask you to join us again and see what kind of questions we have out there.
We've got questions rolling in, and I just first off want to say thank you, Gerry and Fred, for this rich conversation and so many insights that you're sharing already. And want to start with a question from Max Geerling, which is, what are your opinions about business growing closer to politics in the reactive communications in relation to the cultural development of business? You opened up by saying this is not political, but question in a lot of people's minds are that it does seem like business is moving in a political direction.
Well, my thoughts I will tell you is that because the elected officials aren't doing their job, we can't get anything done, regardless of who's got the White House, they're not getting anything done. The people are looking to CEOs and leaders to make decisions to step in. And there's been stories in the Wall Street Journal, McKinsey did a piece or whatever. There's a lot of it out there. And so I don't think there's going to be a choice. You're going to have to figure out where you stand. And maybe this will change our politics. Maybe corporate is going to be a force for good and get us to term limits, which everybody knows is what would be good, but nobody's got the wherewithal to stand up for it. We know we should make gun safety an issue somewhere. I'm a gun owner. I want gun safety, but no one will stand up to the powers that be. I think if corporate CEOs locked arms and said, we're going to do this, CEOs in this world, they decided the world was going to turn 2 degrees to the left, the world would turn 2 degrees to the left. That's how much power we have. But I don't think we're going to have a choice. I think it's going to come out. What we saw with the black executives, Byron Allen, full-page ad going after General Motors, calling them out, saying, how can you have 70% of this particular market be people of color and have nobody up in the senior leadership or nobody's getting advertising? They're going to be out there. And I just think we as corporations, we have the ability to push those politicians, stop writing them checks and make them do the damn right thing. Just think about, we haven't got anything done in the last 2 administrations or any substance.
I think there's the broader issue about politics is government and being a good citizen. And I think, again, back to the circle of influence, back to the circle of concern. If we empower our employees to be great employees because we are inclusive and release their energies, and we also help them be good citizens by what we choose as leaders to participate in within our communities, be it some sort of charity work or working with food banks or whatever the case may be. And that example and role model comes out there because governing is different than the politics. I mean, they're inexorably linked, but the best thing to start is start in your local communities. Get to know your city representatives, get to know the mayor, get to know your congressperson. Start there to make it different, because a lot of what's going on right now, the polarization is taking place on Twitter or Facebook, whatever the case may be. Not that it's not real world, but it's not eyeball to eyeball. There's things people say to each other on social media, they would never say to that person if they're in the same room as they are.
Yeah.
And I think if you can create more human connection as you go from the inside out, I think it'll begin to change that.
So that actually leads into a question from Craig Harbuck on the fact that we are so divided right now in politics, social issues, et cetera. And social media does seem to be playing a factor into this. How can business leaders really think about the way social media impacts this and cultural intelligence in their company with regards to social media or outside of it, or just how can leaders think about that?
I'm going to use the example of Patagonia again, because Patagonia does a great job of being socially conscious and using social media to communicate good things, right? No one listens to the, dog bites man, they listen to man bites dog, anything that's weird. And there's nothing wrong with posting positive things. I think Conscious Capitalism does that as well. You guys are constantly sending out messages of positivity and uplifting humanity through business. I mean, those are the kind of things that will ultimately catch on. It may not get as much attention, but over time, I think it's going to grow and grow and grow. So social media works both ways. It's not just one side. You can't do anything about what someone else says. You can only control your own reaction to it and response.
Well, I think you use, again, I said this before, use social media as a force for good. I believe people should have someone who is purposefully and intentionally pushing information out in the social media arena about the good things that you're doing, or bringing even something else that someone else is doing. You have to have a presence in social media. I'd rather see us play offense. You're all conscious capitalists. I would be promoting that. I'd be pushing that, but I would be doing it in a way that we would talk to some Black and brown LGBTQ youth. And how do you get a younger cohort involved? Because I have people pushing out my social media on certain things, and we get very good response. But I think you're going to have to exercise that muscle, because if we're going to go down the road where CEOs are going to have to check in on more issues, the school issue, kids not being prepared, whatever the case may be, social media is one of the ways you influence people, and in communities of color, particularly, just your presence. So if you've never advertised in a Black publication, or you've never did anything in a ethnic social media outlet, first time you do it, people will go, "Wow, did you notice?" I hear it all the time. "Hey, did you see the ad in Black Enterprise this month? Guess who's advertising?" It changes the way people think about you, and you can actually be proactive in trying to shape your image. And you don't have to have it all right. This is what we're doing. We think it's important. Tell us what you think. We'd like to hear from you. There's ways to use social media in a very positive. Then if you get hit in the eyeballs with a softball that you didn't see coming, then you've got some relationships there. You've got some people you could talk with, and you know where to go to get the story out. I think McDonald's does a really good job of that because they get targeted for everything, and they do a good job at responding through social media to community-based organizations that they involve themselves with, and there's lots of ways for I think companies to do that, and we're going to have to get better at it going forward.
So I think we only have time for one more question, and I want to take Sandy McGeogh's question. She says that one of her fears for the future is our inability to make decisions. Our culture feels like it's influencer-based and shame-based. In your opinion, is this currently, or will this impact us in the future with this topic in mind?
I think we have to be the ones to change it. If you leave it to if you don't cut the grass next to you, and you leave it, you come back 5 years or 10 years, that stuff starts to overtake everything. Okay? You just can't leave it. We have to be part of the solution. We have to say no to the cancel culture. We got to lead and say, no, we're going to push back on these issues. And we're not going to let people get canceled out just because they say something wrong. But we have to lead on issues. We have to push on issues that really matter. And I think politics is one of them. Some of the other inequities from healthcare, the fact that, Black and brown people are going to still get exposed to the next pandemic. Okay, Black kids getting stopped. My grandson's 18 years old, been stopped 3 times already. And one of them, he had the guy on the phone. So we have to get involved to shape the future we want to see. If we just wait for somebody else, I'm afraid that, we're going to have a lot more pain before we have more gain.
We do live in an influencer culture. You can't deny that, but it's always been that way. Any kind of person of notoriety gets, oversized influence. Let's never underestimate as conscious leaders the influence we have within our own companies. Even if you're not the CEO or the founder, you're a different level of executive, you still have the ability to influence. So the best example is always start with yourself and then work with the people around you, and it becomes more and more powerful. That will lead to transformation over time.
Gerry, Fred, thank you so much for giving us so much of your time and wisdom today. I took so much from this. I'm sure everyone else in the community did as well. And thank you for all the work that you're doing to elevate humanity through business.
Amen. Thank you for having us. And go make lots of money and let's put it to good use, you social conscious capitalists out there. That's what we're trying to do. So
feel free to reach out to Gerry. If you need to do that, you can contact the Conscious Capitalism to put your with us. We're happy to answer more questions as things come up, because this stuff has to ruminate a little bit. So thank you all. Godspeed.
Thanks, Fred. Thanks, Alexander, and to the rest of the team. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone who's joined us today. If you can take 1 minute to fill out the survey that Michaela and our team shared in the chat box, we would really appreciate it so that we can keep offering great programming like this and keep getting even better ourselves. With that, I want to say thank you once again. Hope you have a great day and look forward to seeing you on our next virtual gathering coming up.